to the question of excitement, I think that a retrospective, if you will, which I didn't, I mean, you're right, it's there, but I wasn't reading that.
Okay.
What I was reading was the experience. I think I might have said this to you once before recently, that there are a lot of books that talk about the rules for living and all of that sort of thing, but not many books talk about what it feels like to be alive, what it feels like to have lived a life. And this is what is under discussion in this book. There aren't any plans. He's not going to be prescriptive. He's merely reflecting on what it feels like to have lived a life. Regrets, successes, these moments of complexity or confusion, all of those kinds of things were part of this journey for both of them, and it was fascinating to me and exciting, both as a father and as a maker, to listen to someone as accomplished as he is think about the experience of making over a lifetime.
Yeah.
That to me was a real opportunity in reading. Again, going back to the idea of a plan, geez, I'm really glad he didn't offer a plan. There are lots of plans out there. There are thousands of books of plans, ideas for what the future should be like. But again, as I say, for me as a reader and for me as a person living, and a person who has lived a long life, I found, yeah, I would say two things about that. Number one, from those perspectives, plans are a little bit iffy for me because I've heard a lot of them.
Yeah.
And secondly, what I'm concerned about on a day-to-day basis is not what I did before, but how what I have done poises me for the future. And that's one of the things he underscores often in that book. Is it's not about looking back, it's about looking forward, it's about being positioned for tomorrow. And I think at one point he says that quite explicitly. And so these observations about the past are merely ways to talk about how he's positioned for the future. And I found that very interesting.
Well, I mean, I guess that's what I meant. That's what and what I was missing. I guess I don't remember that part. I must have glossed over it. I see how he, as an architect, he builds an environment, and then who knows what people are going to do there. It's interesting to find out how people are going to use that space. And so I see that part of thinking about the future. I don't know. I guess I'm not sure what I mean. When I say plans, I don't necessarily mean prescriptive. And maybe I think I've been thinking a lot about this recently, and this book is a good example of it, where Renzo talks about how he has dealt with problems like the who was it? It wasn't the mayor of London. It was not
Paris.
Paris. Was it the mayor who hated?
It was the mayor. It was the mayor of Paris for the Centre Pompidou.
Right. So Pompidou Center, the mayor said, over my dead body will this thing be built. And so they resubmitted it to him, and he still didn't like it, and they resubmitted it to him. And then he died of old age. And then over his dead body, they built this thing. And there were many other cases like that, where there turned out to be some kind of problem that they didn't foresee. And they found a way around the problem, but they couldn't have planned for that. You can only look back at that in hindsight and trace the path from the end of the
Well,
project to the beginning.
is that what he says? I mean, in talking about the structural Pompidou in particular, the way I read it and the way I've heard him talk about it also, is that that happened to be a matter of happenstance and persistence. In other words, he and Richard Rogers were persistent about trying to advance that program, but they couldn't have foreseen that the mayor would die in office 3 months after their presentation.
Right.
So that's just, like the way things happen. Yeah,
But that's what I mean. I mean that they, when you look back at a project from a time after its completion, you can trace the jagged line that you went through to get from the beginning of the project to its end. But if you're standing at the beginning of a project looking forward, it's all a blur. There is that line isn't there because you haven't done it yet. The solutions to the problems haven't been found. I actually wish he talked a little bit more about that. Like he talked about it for the library in New York, where they couldn't damage these other buildings that were very close to it.
That's the Pierpont Morgan.
Right.
Yeah.
So they had to dig down instead, and that was the solution to that problem.
Right.
I wish I knew more about how they arrived at that solution. Like, what else did they try? What else did they think about? And how did they end up knowing that this was the way that they wanted to go?
He did talk about that. I think, simply pointing out that they couldn't move laterally, and going vertically was an unattractive option. And so, and if you look at the library, maybe you can find photographs online or something. I've been there so many times. But if you look at the library, it going up presents this very kind of awkward, it presents itself as a very awkward solution, and sort of, in a funny way, kind of thoughtless. But going down was very challenging, and required really great precision. But Piano has experience with going down, thinking particularly of the Kansai airport.
They sunk those pylons into the seabed.
Yes. And so he has a lot of experience with that. And he has teams, as it were, that he could access to have these conversations and discussions. And of course, he had a huge budget.
Which helps.
So, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
So they could take advantage of those solutions. I think there's a lot of yeah.
Well, I mean, this is also, I came to this book because I come to every book that I read with the questions that are in my life at the time.
Yeah.
And so it's a bit unfair because the book was not written to answer whatever questions I happen to have in the middle of December in 2021. But
Well,
the questions that I'm thinking about are, what do I do next? How do I get a team? How do I get a giant budget? Those are exactly the sorts of things that I want to know. And Renzo didn't tell me, but that he was hardly thinking about me when he wrote this.
right, but that information is there. I mean, his work with Richard Rogers is well documented. The work on the Pompidou Center is well documented. How they started out, all those kinds of things, and then there are lots of videos. There's this great video, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, where he talks about how the studio operates and that sort of thing. So I mean, I also think that one of the great things about any book is the way it pulls us out of where we are
Uh-huh.
and invites us to go somewhere else. I mean, I think that the great thing about trying to answer my questions is being dragged into somebody else's question, which then allows me to reflect back on my own situation from a different perspective and with new information.
Yeah.
My own experience in my life is that I don't think that alone I come up with very fascinating questions. I don't think that alone I come up with very interesting solutions. But I do believe that by reading, by being dragged into somebody else's thinking, my own thinking becomes in some way inspired, and
Yeah.
that's what I read for.